Thank you for joining the Minority Alliance Organization meeting today. Today, our topics are going to be speaking on basically the creation of Black financial hubs. We'll speak on the issue of Mr. Roger Walker, also about the need for more minorities within the tech industry. And when it comes to the creation of Black financial hubs, one interesting thing that has just become national news, is something that has actually begun 2 months ago prior to now. But 19 Black families decided to uh, build a co-op and basically go buy land in South Georgia, close to the Macon area. And they bought about 94 acres to be able to create a sort of Black town that they were going to end up calling it Freedom, Georgia. But this area, the idea is to have Black self-sustaining businesses within this town. Two of the ladies who actually got together initially, Miss Renee Walters and Miss Ashley Scott, originally got together with this idea of trying to buy area to be able to get these things together for other minorities to be able to come visit and basically have a blueprint of certain different towns and ways we could build our own economic areas and things of that nature. So, Mark, I want to ask you, basically, after reading that article and seeing the things that they were doing there, what would be your take on the need for more areas and towns like this to actually be invested into by minorities so that we could build up our own self-sustaining areas and things of that nature?
So I know we talked about it in a previous call, but again, when you go to any other city, any other major city that I can think of, what you're going to find is you're going to find areas that are basically kind of carved out of the city that have a specific ethnic group that lives there. It's socioeconomic, but at the same time, they have kind of everything to themselves. They own homes, they own businesses, they have, they have banks, they have, places that pretty much do everything. And they also have, kind of a destination areas for different parts of business that will actually bring in outsiders to those areas that generate money through them, for them, and it's self-sustaining. You see that everywhere you go. But what you do not see is you do not see that for the Black community. We do not have that sort of economic infrastructure in any type of socioeconomic group that you would consider Black anywhere you go in America. The problem with that, obviously, is that we can't really get that foothold where we're still going to be dependent upon dealing with with other areas and other people in order to get those things, in order to get anything done. And not having your own, it cuts down on the amount of voice that you have. And even politically, locally, it will cut down and limit the amount of influence that you have, because your economic impact, your economic influence is so stunted. Now, the reason why I think that the Freedom Project is so important is because we have to, in order to reverse this, in order to make this actually equal and to make this actually even, and we're all on the same, same playing field, and we're all on the same, level, is we have to have a Black power structure, a Black economic infrastructure built. Now, I know that that's going to make a few people uncomfortable, where someone goes, well, that's not right. That's almost a racist statement. I mean, if someone came out and said, we need an all-white power structure and things like that, people would be mad. Here's my response to that. How do you think you got one? Even if there is more integration today than there was before, I guarantee you, as these structures were being built, as these financial power structures were being built, as railroads were being built, as U.S. Steel got big, as as all the different things that got there, what do you think was the demographic of those power structures? What do you think was the methodology in which they were done? I mean, those things happen that way. And then once those were established, and then after many, many years of, kind of locking people out and, the type of oppression and the type of suppression that it took to keep other people out, eventually some things happened where, they had to let others in. And now you have a few others getting in, and a couple of those people, they get some money, so they're sated and they're kind of off to the side, and they're not really worried about it now because they got theirs. Because again, we've kind of taught ourselves, and they kind of taught it to us, and we kind of teach it to each other, that you're kind of in it for yourself. And that you got to take care of yourself. You got to take care of yours. Nobody's going to hook you up. Nobody's going to take care of you. Things like that, and it kind of builds this structure where we're going to be, not looking out for each other. We're not going to take care of each other. We're not going to do anything communal, because if you use the word communal, someone takes that word, co-ops it, turns it communist. Now that's one of our angry scarlet letter words. So it shuts things down, and people don't want to deal with it. So the Freedom Project is so important because if, as they do this, they are investing their money, so they're beholden to no one. They own the land, so they're beholden to no one. They're going to build businesses that are going to be beholden only to them. They're going to be able to bring people in and use what they have, the money and the influence and the land, to build an infrastructure of talent and specialized skills that, again, are beholden to no one. And that's how you begin to build that structure. So there is a tremendous importance, not only for this project to succeed, but for it to be duplicated and for it to be replicated all over. Not just all over, all over Georgia, but all over the United States, and realistically, all over the world, where you're going to find anyone who, is in that kind of power structure bubble where we can't break through that glass ceiling, and there's only so much you can get, and maybe one or two of us out of a generation of millions can break through, and maybe a couple of people can break through because they can play ball, or a couple of people can break through because they can rap, or something like that, where we're not able to build a full infrastructure where there's a fund where a child growing up in an area is, they're going to be able to get a job. They're going to be able to go to school. They're going to be able to get an education. They're going to be able to compete, and they're going to be a part of what's being built in their area, in their, kind of, structure, to where we can get actual generational wealth and generational economic freedom. And that's just, that's how we get out of this, and that is how we take back, what we're looking for. We have spent way too much time looking for a way that we can either get the equality handed to us, or get someone to agree to stand equal with us. Those have not proven to be successful. Those will not continue to be successful, because there is actual money to be made in it not being successful. So if those two things are correct, there's only one other way, and that is to build it ourselves.
And I mean, that comes into play with what they're doing basically, and what you're saying, in creating these type of things for ourselves. It goes back to the whole saying of, 40 acres and a mule, and people saying we never even got the things that we were promised in the first place. And when you're looking at it in a 2020 sense, I don't think we're really going to need any mules anymore. And I don't see the government just handing people land. I honestly don't. But I mean, the true 40 acres and a mule in 2020, what it looks like is, for me, removing the burdens within minority communities to allow for the opportunity of equality, and for us to be able to build these economic hubs, for ourselves, to build our own financial, wealth, generational wealth going forward, so that we're not asking anyone for any handouts or anything of that sort. And while doing a little bit of research, on the whole 40 acres and a mule topic, Basically, what that is land redistribution, and redistribution is the key to building economic value within minority communities. You have to have ownership within the things in your community. And you can go all the way back to, well, in my research, I went all the way back to looking at, post Civil War. How did we even get to this point in the first place? Why weren't the things that were promised to us earlier on after the Civil War, actually carried out? So that takes us back to the whole Special Field Order 15, a order signed by General William T. Sherman and Sherman's March to the Sea during the Civil War that was going through Atlanta. When he actually got to Savannah, he had a meeting there with about 20 of the black leaders in the South area, 20 of the major black leaders, led by Reverend Garrison Frazier. And basically, in the conversation there, he asked basically what, as the black leaders currently at that time in the South, what they wanted. And they said, in what manner would you prefer to live? Scattered among the whites in colonies, or, in colonies by yourself? And their answer to that would be they preferred to live by themselves because they felt that the prejudice amongst blacks in the South at the time was going to take years to get over. And that's still a situation, it's sad to say, over 100 years later. Plus, we're still living under a society to where we still feel the same way. And it's furthermore than in the South, these ideology and this feeling, has spread all over the country at this point. So when it comes down to it, I believe that as minorities, we have to not sit around and hope that somebody, you know, actually falls through on things that were promised to us over hundreds of years ago, and take these steps in building our own sustaining economies ourselves, things that our forefathers wanted to do and were not allowed the opportunity to truly create for themselves.
Right. I mean, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I think is ultra important, in building that thing is being able to use this system against itself. I mean, there's a system that on one hand can, absolutely keep, a minority community from getting as far as they would like to go in doing this type of project. Because again, in order to build your own, there's a built-in mentality and a built-in kind of, wink, wink understanding that in order for you to become equal, I have to lose something. And that's been successfully sold across the country to, kind of everyone, which is what builds in this kind of instant resistance even to talking about things like this. It makes it uncomfortable because there's a complete this understanding, this kind of unspoken understanding that in order for us to get some sort of financial stability, just as a people, requires taking something out of someone's pocket. And it requires taking something from someone. You hear that in the rhetoric of politics today, where they talk about, oh, these people coming to your neighborhood, or these people coming to your area, this area not being what it used to be, and all these other things, is because there's an understanding that we're not supposed to come up there. We're not supposed to get to that level. We're not supposed to have that kind of house in that kind of neighborhood. Our kids aren't supposed to go to that kind of school. And it goes all the way back to, as you were saying, you get to the end of the Civil War, it's like, okay, yeah, they're not our slaves anymore, but they're not equal either. the systems that were set up around that go deep and long. It took 160 years of cultivating that system, and it's being pushed and it's being prodded as we've gone along this whole time. And there have been some setbacks and there have been some victories, but we're kind of at this place now where it's like, yes, you can make some money. Yes, you can own a home, but what we cannot do is get our own power structure. So the only way to really do that is to be able to use its system against itself. We have the ability, because of the fact that we have, those amongst us who are business people, who are lawyers, who are scholars, who are academics, and they have the ability to be able to, kind of pull from the system, kind of the parts that have benefited those over these years in building their own power structures and been able to stop it. One of the examples I use is in the building of the Church of Scientology, for example. When they were building that, and that's the most recent religion that there is, because it was built within the last like 70 years. And as that was being built, actually sooner than that, but as it was being built, I mean, along the way, they would sue you into poverty for discrimination just for looking at that religion funny. And that was the sort of thing that kind of built not only cash and not only built a financial base, but it also built kind of a situation where it's like, okay, well, we have no choice but to treat it as an equal, because if we don't, we suffer for it financially. That's using the system against itself, where something that people really wouldn't even take seriously, we're kind of forced to. And there are so many different ways that can be done from that. That's just one example, but there are so many ways that something like that can be done, as far as being able to take advantage of a system, being able to, I grew up in where I grew up, I watched as people who came over to the country would get business loans. They would get them, they would get these tax-free or interest-free loans that would be good for 7 years. And in year 6, transfer the business to a cousin. Then bought yourself 6 more years. Then transfer it again. Bought yourself 6 more years. And as they did that, and that was just more and more money that was going on. So there are so many different ways in which the system can be used in order to not only get what you are looking for, but also to keep others and to keep those who would try to suppress you and try to hold you down from being able to get an actual foothold into what you have. So I think, again, it comes down to being able to not just lend the time and not just lend the money, but to lend the talents, to lend the abilities of those who have studied these things, who know these things, who are interconnected and intertwined, those who are, not just financially, who have the financial wherewithal to be able to have that sort of backing, but to also have the expertise, because we need that. Knowledge is power, and knowledge in this case will also be wealth, because putting that type of expertise behind the manpower, behind the money, behind the influence is going to be what it takes to actually build an infrastructure for a minority hub.
Yes, sir. And even going back and looking at your statement earlier when you mentioned integration, the the biggest issue with integration is the fact that you still had a group of people that weren't given their own. You're allowed to now come into ours. You're now allowed to be a part of our society, but that still takes away the ability for you to create your own. So that was one of the biggest issues when I think when we decided to integrate as soon as we did. And I believe people had a false perception of what integration would bring and how we would truly be affected as Black people through integration. We didn't get the same equality that I guess, had the perception we would be able to be in the same areas of business and things of that sort, of that such, as other races. But when
I was just going to say it's a false promise of individual exceptionalism. It was kind of set up to where we didn't, we don't need you guys all to be, equal with us. You're allowed to be in our system, as you said. So instead of you building a system of your own, it's like, some of you can get into our system, and you can get rich in our system. You can actually achieve your dreams in our system. And by doing that, like I said, it promotes a kind of an individualized exceptionalism to where you yourself and you and your family can get over, and that ends up being fine for you. And that was kind of how they were able to kind of get people on board with being integrated into their system. And it was such a quick fix for some people who didn't know any better. And also, being able to get anything was way more than they had ever had in their lives, and it was like a dream come true. So it was easy to kind of sell that lie as the way out. So it became such an easy thing. It almost became a drug, because it was such an easy thing to be like, okay, well, yeah, we can just be a part of the system, and I can just get mine. And it was easy for others to kind of flip it and be like, well, what do you mean? Why would you need your own structure? Look how integration's working out. Look at this guy. Look at this lady. Look at these people. They're doing great. And while in the meantime, the full weight of everything else that falls on a minority community is not addressed. It just gets heavier because the population continues to grow and the opportunities continue to shrink.
Yes, sir. And when we speak on opportunity, as me and you were discussing a little bit earlier, especially within the minority community, one of the biggest areas where we yet to have really seen any true level of integration in any aspect, and um, any type of businesses uh, being ran in true ownership by minorities, is within the tech sector. And I think that we need to really emphasize on the way we should be raising up our next generation of young minorities to be tech savvy and to have the knowledge to be able to run their own Google, be able to run their own Apple and Amazon and things of that nature. Because the only place that you see minorities when you're talking tech industry is at the warehouse level, at the distribution level, uh, at the level where the physical products and general labor is needed to move the physical product. But further than that, when you're speaking on coders, um, actual CEOs within tech companies and things of that nature, you yet to have see a true percentage of minorities who are in these areas. So my huge question by saying all this is, how can we maybe find a foothold within the tech industry to try to basically get more minorities into ownership positions in tech, especially when it's such a saturated market as far as what can you create that can compete with Apple, that can compete with Google? What are some things and new ideas that we can be creating within our communities to find that foothold?
Well, I mean, obviously, based on your field of study, you know more of this than I do. But I can tell you, kind of, just from my own perspective on the situation. eh, First things first is we need to understand that tech is going to be the new trade, right? As we went through the 20th century, it was a century of learning a craft and learning a trade. People worked with their hands. People had specific skill sets, whether it was steel, whether it was it was building things, it was architecture, all the different things that were going on. As we got to the latter part of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, that began to switch over towards tech. And although that has been where we're going, and that's been such a powerful growth market over the years. I mean, we see the rise of some of these companies and the amount of money. Like, if you look at companies who have made more money than any other company in the history of the world, most of them have happened in the last few years, and almost all of them revolve around tech. So understanding that that's going to be the new trade. So more people having the skill sets and learning the skill sets, again, you're going to have these talent jumps, and you're going to see that all the time, because we saw these same type of talent jumps, and we see them in every other trade, every other thing that we see that people apply themselves to. There are jumps and evolutions in them, and as time goes along, you're able to, kind of capitalize on it, seize on it, and actually grow from it. So in the tech field, there are different avenues of tech that kind of reveals itself, like literally almost daily. A new application of how tech can be used can be done. I mean, no one does anything the way they used to anymore, and that is because of the integration of technology into all the things that we do in our everyday lives. So being able to, have more minorities kind of look at tech as a trade, and kind of look at that as the type of schooling that we're looking for, uh, we're going to be able to find, the next move, the next thing, and be able to look a couple of steps ahead instead of being a couple of steps behind, because the next leap is always going to be around the corner. A few years ago, it would have been unthinkable to use your phone to order food and have it delivered to your house without ever having to pull $1 out of your wallet. So as these things go ahead, we can look at different innovations, whether it be in the medical field, whether it be in, how we deal with each other and how we're integrating, how things are built, and how things are distributed. And there's going to be, these kind of things that reveal themselves. But as minority groups, I believe that it is incumbent upon us to, as we have our youth coming out, to be able to kind of build our own kind of, tech infrastructure, to be able to kind of build our own kind of type of coding, to be able to try and create games, to be able to create different things. I think a perfect place where someone could, apply that trade is to the gambling industry. I think being able to integrate even more technology into what people are doing, whether it be sports gambling or whether it even be, normal stuff where the casinos end up becoming extinct. That's the sort of thing, just off the top of my head, where tech could be applied and a whole infrastructure could be built if some people are willing to capitalize on that. So, I'll kick it back to you and ask you kind of what you think, as far as like what can be done or what people can do to kind of set themselves up going on generation for generation in the tech field for minorities.
I would have to say, with it being such a saturated market, and I mean, innovation within the tech market is, of course, something that we need to look into and we need to be pushing for and trying to accomplish. But it is something that is difficult because it takes years of work and years of development to reach some of the technology that a lot of these companies have been able to build. So I think the biggest thing we can do as far as finding a foothold within the tech industry is when you have tech companies that go up for sale, or even if there can be a group of more wealthier minorities that could get together and figure out ways, instead of letting Google buy, you know, the best new tech startup, we could actually get together and be creating our own umbrella company, similar to Alphabet, that could host a lot of these startup companies and build them into our own companies. Because I feel like in the tech industry, I mean, as I said, I believe that's one of the quickest ways that we could integrate. And I mean, in the long run, of course, we should be learning different levels, as you said, with coding and the creation of especially apps. I mean, apps are used every day. That's one of the, easiest ways to get into the industry. But with those taking years of development, we have to figure out ways where we can find a foothold within the next year or two to already start having more ownership within the tech sector. And basically, with the last thing I wanted to discuss today was looking over the situation with Roderick Walker here, actually in Clayton County in Georgia. Basically, you had a young man who was riding as a co-pilot within a lift, that the lift had a missing tail light, apparently, and was pulled over for this reason. Um, After the young man was removed from the vehicle, due to the video that's been seen nationwide, we see that he was basically uh, punched in the face a couple times, had his face smashed into the ground by the arresting officers that were there on the scene. When looking at the situation, as we say with each one that's happened, it seems to be every 2 weeks, a minimum every 2 weeks is something that occurs, and it's still occurring. Uh, why is it that the message is not being heard nationwide? Why is it that things are truly not beginning to change? I mean, Congress has been back in session, what is it, about 2 weeks now, and they, they passed the bill today to be able to protect people within the military as far as sexual misconduct, and being able to go through a third party to be able to address these things. And that's great and all. And then, of course, within our military, our protectors of our nation, we should be having laws passed that pertain to them. But when you look at people that have been systemically uh, tarnished over years, and we can't get not a single bill passed uh, that is geared towards the causes that we are fighting for. When you guys have had over who knows how long a lot of these bills have been sitting on the floor, uh, basically just waiting on a vote. So, as I said, with these issues still occurring, what can we do at this point?
So the first thing to understand is that you know, there is no incentive at this point for the system as far as policing is concerned to change. Qualified immunity still exists. People are still able to kind of, have the sort of protections that they've always been able to enjoy. At this point, again, you have a situation where nothing would have happened at all had there not been video. And is a great consequence of our days that there is video and everybody's got a camera on, in their pocket and things like that, and that's great. It gives anyone that does get any type of justice and anything that does happen, that's the only shot, because the ideology hasn't changed, the way people look at it still hasn't changed. And one of the reasons is because this country is the country isn't lit. Stand that Congress is paralyzed, and it has been paralyzed for a while. I mean, I believe it was like maybe 3-4 weeks after George Floyd was killed, that a police reform bill was passed in the House of Representatives that kind of dealt with qualified immunity and things like that, and it never even made it to the Senate floor for a vote. It was blocked immediately. There are certain things that people will go ahead and pass because it gets your votes both ways. Supporting the military and making things easier for the military, that gets you over both ways on both sides of the aisle when it comes to votes. But there's a clear demarcation line between doing something like that for the military, which everyone supports, and doing something that directly affects a minority. And it also highlights and validates an ugly truth that people do not want to face, which is not only is racism real, not only is racism in our face, it is overt and it is systematic. And there are people that not only enjoy the system, they are invested in the system. And so keeping it going is a mission. It actually is a mission, and I spoke about this before, where in America and a lot of different places, not only is it a crime to be black, but the greatest crime of all is not listening and not bowing your head to a police officer when they speak to you. that alone has gotten people beaten up. It's gotten people killed. It's gotten people unjustly, kind of treated. And again, it becomes about the person. It becomes about the victim as more than it becomes about the officer. One of the first things that I heard about, after the incident with Mr. Walker, is about his record and about the fact that there's a warrant, and then you come to find out that that's not even really the case. But I don't care. I mean, the bottom line is that that's not what they didn't know. That when they roll up on this car for a supposed broken tail light, you didn't roll up with a crystal ball. You didn't roll up with a face scanner. You didn't roll up and know the stuff that you're coming out about now. So the fact that, that number one, they took it to where they took it, that they're so comfortable doing it, that they do it in front of cameras now. It's not just that it's happening every couple of weeks. It's happening on camera every couple of weeks. And they continue to do it because there's no incentive. There's no disincentive. Did this officer lose his job? Yeah. I'll check back on him in about 18 months when he's working someplace else. We've had a couple arrested here or there, but we see incidents all the time. And it's pulling teeth to keep the system, even to attempt to fake honesty. It just hasn't been a thing because there isn't a political will behind it. And one of the reasons there's no political will behind it is because there is no political consequence coming from the minority community when they do not do what they're there to do. Even now, the minority support for even voting period is beginning to erode. We're seeing that, and in the mainstream media, in where we're looking around, we're seeing minority support erode. We're seeing certain issues not being supported the way that they were months ago. They're seeing that the attention span of the minority community is beginning to wane, and as long as that continues to be the case, they can literally duck their head, run out the clock, and wait for us to go find something else to do. And there's not enough of us, kind of jumping up and down and screaming. I mean, you and I and others who have done these calls, we've kind of talked about it. We've kind of talked about the sort of things that we're looking for. And, there's people that have marched in the street. There are people who've organized things. There are people who've, paid a heavy price to attempt to get justice. But at the same time, we have not done what we truly needed to do, which is make people pay a price politically. Like, there are people who are in positions to make these things happen. They are not getting it done, and they still have their jobs. That's the bottom line. And, that is the part that has to change. There has to be a literal mandate of what is expected and a clear consequence for when it doesn't come.
And I mean, when you mention the political power, that we have, that's not to say that people haven't been out protesting. That's not to downplay the effort that the common everyday person has been making towards bringing attention to these situations and things of that such. Political power is more so actually being able to uh, de-seat a sheriff, to de-seat a DA, have the power to change who's uh, in power over these situations and who's calling the shots over if this officer is actually, um, if this officer actually has to deal with any repercussions for the actions that they have done. So we have to figure out. I mean, as you said, political power. That takes the effort of us voting in elected officials that are at the will of the people and that are actually going to do the job the way that we are asking the job to be done, which is for true justice and true equality. Across the board. No matter what race you are, no matter what color you are, that's all I believe anyone is asking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to make sure that that I'm clear about that. I absolutely, we needed to be protesting in the streets. We needed to get that message out. We needed to bring attention to it. And I think the people that have done that have been successful. And and my heart breaks for all those people who've been hurt, and some of those have been killed. in trying to get that message out and in trying to get that justice. So I don't mean that. What I mean is we need to do, in addition to this, in addition to what has already been done, in addition to the marches, in addition to the protests, in addition to the showing of solidarity that we've seen from Black folks, from white folks, from people across the entire spectrum, is that there also needs to be a political will behind this. We need, I would love to see a march, and during that march, to hear that 30,000 people registered to vote that day. In that city, that 50,000 people registered to vote that day, and then we want to see, people in these groups step up and volunteer to be pollsters. We want to see people, we want to see more of what we've seen, like from LeBron, as far as like being able to talk to people and get polling places made in open air stadiums so people can vote safely with enough space for social distancing and be able to do things like that. And then on the day that it's time for us to be able to vote, even if we can do it early in the states and the areas that have early voting, we need to have people in even smaller groups, because of the areas, to march to go vote. Like, we need to bring that power to fruition. We have the numbers. We have to use them. That's kind of like my point. We can't allow them to take advantage of the news cycle, take advantage of distractionary tactics, and take advantage of the attention span, and kind of bury their head in the sand, kind of bob and weave, kind of hold on to us and lean into the ropes and try to wait out the clock. We have people who are drawing a government paycheck because we sent them to Washington as a representative. And whether our districts were gerrymandered, or whether we were in an area where a person that we wanted in that position is in that position, the bottom line is our political system is paralyzed. It is as partisan as it is not moving. That cannot be acceptable, because our people are dying in the street. The people who are dying in the street are being vilified. The people who should be vilified are getting away with it. There are innocent people getting hurt in the crossfire. There are innocent businesses being destroyed in the crossfire. There are people being demonized who are completely innocent. And none of this is how any of this is supposed to work. And we all have, and once we recognize that, there's another part that goes along with what everyone is doing.
Yes, sir. And I mean, in conclusion of our meeting today, basically, a statement that I ran across this week. Basically, we continue to ask to play basically in everybody else's game, in a sense. We want to just be a part of the game. Hey, can we borrow your ball? Can we play with you? Instead of having the mentality of creating our own game and people feeling, hey, we want to come play with you guys instead. So I think we have to change the overall, as I said, what we've even started to do so far with the organization and the ideology that we push in the different discussions that we have. We have to continue to push for the change of mentalities amongst minorities in the community to do things differently that we haven't tried before, or to take different approaches to overcome the systemic racism and the inequality that we experience. And just a couple things to speak on this week. The 2020 census, has been very important. I know we talked about it about 3 weeks ago, and the importance of the census being done this year and everybody being accounted for. It was brought to my knowledge that Georgia has the second worst, uh, the second worst basically rate for people that are actually turning their censuses in and actually answering the questions for the census, which means having the second worst rate out of 50 states in the country is horrible. And that means that there will be a ton of people that will be unaccounted for. And I understand that, with the COVID situation and, people misplacement in housing and things of that such, and ending up in different areas may have affected, you having the same access. but figure out how you can fill out the census online, or if you can have a form mailed to you, or whatever it takes to basically be accounted for, because these are going to be the ways that we actually get officials that we back and officials that we want to vote for within office, and have basically the districting in a sense to where we can have a bit of power in certain areas and things of that nature. All of that boils down to the census. And another thing that we need to look at is on Mondays, we've been doing the financial meetings and things of that such. And those meetings aren't normally too long. You know, it takes maybe about 10 minutes to watch a full video there and look at a lot of the key points that we make. You know, anything that we talk about within this organization, we try to remain a neutral body and not, you know, say up, down, or in between one way a person should believe. We believe in the independence thinking of each person within the minority community. With that being said, take these ideals that we discuss and these topics that we go over and try to just implement them in your own life, you know, different ways that you feel necessary and different ways that you can, to be able to change the culture that we're building currently around minority communities. And
Absolutely.
again, yes, sir. And if there's anything you wanted to say, you know, in conclusion of our meeting today, any of the topics that we discussed that you know, wanted to point out something that we really should be looking at from it.
No, just one last little note, just to piggyback off what you said on the census. I did read this and hear this, and I actually checked a couple of different sites to check on it to see if it was true. They are ramping down and kind of slowing down on the amount of census takers that they're sending out and things like that. You know, don't be fooled, guys. I mean, this is by design. There are, again, you know, as we said before, they're not just the amount of representation that we can get in a general area, also the amount of funding that can come through an area. So there is an incentive to keeping some numbers low in some places. So there are people counting on you not filling one out. So make sure that you do. Make sure that you, you know, if you, it only takes a couple of minutes to do it. If you do it online, I mean, we all have tablets, we all have phones, we all have computers. So, you know, even if we, you know, don't get a census taker, even if we don't fill it out in the mail, you know, if you can just take a couple of minutes out of your day to knock that out, you know, it will be helpful to your area.
Yes, sir. And thank you for that. On that end, thank everybody for being another part of our meeting this week. And hopefully we can continue to push, as I said, the ideology that we are growing within this organization to push our cause further and reach for the things that we are trying to accomplish.
All right. Everybody take care.